Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Kerfuffle webinar. And I am absolutely delighted to have here today Ashley Cornelius and David Hanna from Cornerstone Tax. How are you, gents?
Oh, I'm fine, and good morning to you.
Very well, thank you, Simon. Good morning.
I don't know. There seems to be just a really obvious joke in there that we're just about to deal with tax, and there's a stormtrooper looking over your shoulder, ready to go. And David, as you just said off camera there, we've got the stormtrooper up there, and we've got Princess Leia with your resplendent earphones on there. I'm assuming you can hear me in those babies.
Oh, I know, they're absolutely perfect. You know, the other joke, of course, for the slightly older generation is, of course, that these make me look like a Cyberman. But
I mean, we're really going. As I said before, I did not expect us to deviate off on this when we're looking at tax issues, but this is how you get to my sweet spot. I'm
just glad that David hasn't worn his gold bikini today to complete the layer visual.
That's a tough sell.
Sorry, mate. I was in the hot tub last night. That's at the dry cleaners now, so you're all right.
Yeah, we don't want to start going with too many analogies, or the audience will point out that I'm looking a lot like Jabba the Hutt these days. But anyway, gents, I can't believe a less seamless segue to us talking about the stamping out incorrect SDLT. than looking at Cybermen and obviously everything from 1970s and 80s sci-fi, but we're going to do that anyway. So, gents, look, we're here today to talk about obviously Cornerstone Tax. You've been helping the public out from not paying too much tax in terms of SDLT. You hit me with just David, a staggering figure that you've been able to save over £14 million for the public at the moment, with covering just over 600 cases for people that were going to be paying too much tax.
Well, in actual fact, Simon, that's the figure of money that we've recovered from HMRC from already overpaid tax in the last 12 months.
It's incredible, absolutely.
We've also been able to swerve, as I describe it, by spotting issues early on before completion. We've been able to swerve about another 8 million.
Staggering, absolutely staggering. So, guys, could you just obviously, for people that don't know the whole area and everything else there, could you just give us an elevator pitch of the issue that you're helping solve for people, and just a mini bit of background about yourselves, just to give a bit of context?
Okay, fine. I mean, Cornerstone Tax exists because when stamp duty was introduced, stamp duty land tax was introduced in 2003, replacing the old stamp duty. The solicitors kept on doing business as if it were the old stamp duty, not this new self-assessment tax. And the accountants have always thought that it's a lawyer's tax. So there was a gap in understanding. We stepped in to fill that gap, and particularly since 2016, when the rates diverged massively, we were seeing error after error after error, failure to notice reliefs, and there are 49 of them, and some of the more esoteric areas like connected parties. So particularly with this important distinction between what is residential and what is not, and that can have a massive impact on the tax bill, we decided to get into the area and advise people.
That's excellent. Thank you for the overview there. And I mean, how much of an issue do you think this is? I mean, how frequently do you see errors in a stamp duty payment? Is this one of those ones that is once in a blue moon, or is it happening far more often than people would think?
I believe it's happening far more often than people think. I mean, that 14 million figure was recovered on just over 600 transactions. On average, there are 120,000 transactions a month in this country. Yeah. So as a statistical sample, it's tiny. What we don't know is, and I've seen what we don't know is exactly how many stamp duty returns are wrong and how many are overpaid. But I had a friend who works funny enough, in professional indemnity insurance as a solicitor, and he said it's probably as many as 4 in 10. Now, I'm not saying it is that high, but it potentially could be.
And you obviously, when I was looking at the website, going through details, when we were looking at the company before you, thanks for coming on, Kerfuffle, by the way, that goes without saying there. The first question that you make, the point that everybody asks you is obviously, is it legal there? And of course, you make the point, well, any payments come back directly from HMRC, don't they? So it's as clear as can be, can't you? But can we just deal with that element up front? When people do come to you and obviously ask that question, what's your stock response back to them?
Well, it is legal. I mean, what we're going to do is we're going to advise you on the law. We're going to advise you in line with HMRC guidance. We're going to advise you in line with everything we know, because for those of people who aren't familiar with the tax environment, you start with the statute, the legal frame, you then go to case law, then you go to revenue guidance. And in one instance, we had a 3-year battle with the revenue over multiple dwellings relief.
Yeah.
And the minimum rate, and we actually ended up forcing the revenue to change their guidance because they got it wrong.
Yeah.
So, and this bears down on why the problem is so widespread. Is that HMRC have their own calculator. You notice the inverted commas, which in 2018 they admitted is only an estimator. You're supposed to do it properly, was their own phrase. But many of the online calculators that you see slavishly follow HMRC's estimator and therefore repeat the errors. So typically, this is why problems occur. Yeah. And you know, I remember dealing with a client just before Christmas last year, and he's a prop trader, rang me up, said, I'm buying this property, 1.85 million. From a deceased person's estate, what's the stamp duty? And I said, nothing. And there was this pause for breath. And I said, no, because there's a special relief for that.
Yeah.
He'd never heard of it. And he'd been a property trader for 10 years.
Yeah.
So I'll call it a lack of education, a lack of information, not just amongst the client base, but also really amongst the advisor base. There's a large degree of ignorance is perhaps too strong a word, but a large degree of, particularly with solicitors, going, well, it just works the same way as it has done for the last 16, 17 years, and not looking. And one of the things we try and do, and we do at Cornerstone, is we ask for everything. I mean, every single little detail, sometimes even right down to questioning the accuracy of the estate agent's particulars, because what might be described as an attractive outbuilding was in fact a commercial workshop, and that can have a material impact.
And so I suppose, just like in any area where there have been a lot of layers, a lot of, you know, over time, quite a convoluted set of rules have developed there. I mean, that's just, it doesn't matter what walk of life you're in, that's when you need a specialist, isn't it?
Oh, completely. You know, to rely on a non-specialist would be, well, to use the phrase, that's like asking the scrub nurse to do brain surgery. The outcomes are not likely to be good, are they?
No, I don't think we're quite at that state, but we're going to wait and see. Well, and guys, how long has this been going on then? Was it, I think from what you'd said previously, there was it was changes in laws or statutes that had led to the increase in this, but do you want to just give us, I mean, has this always been an issue, or has there been a point in time when this really started becoming a major point?
It really started to become a major point around 2015, 2016. Up until that point, the rates of stamp duty on property between residential and non-residential have been the same. Suddenly it came into sharp focus, because if you're not completely residential, then you don't pay the resi rates, but you don't pay the 3% surcharge, nor do you pay the new 2% non-resident surcharge.
Yeah.
And so that's what we call the initial start point. Get that right, and you're heading in the right direction. Then look at reliefs, because even on a relative, I'll call it relatively modest dwelling at £1 million, depends on where you're based. If you're listening to this, that may be immodest. But if that's got an annex, there's anything from £15,000 to a maximum of £87,000 per annex saved. So I mean, if you were to
such an incredible jump out figure right there on just one element, as you've been able to to jump into. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about the sales and negotiation process, as far as the agent is concerned, how many people walk away from a deal because their initial first guesstimate of SDLT is wrong?
Yeah.
How many, how much more could you improve your, the seller's position, which is ultimately who the agent is acting for? How much could you improve the price obtained if the prospective buyer had an accurate picture of what the stamp duty was likely to be? I mean, we just looked at a 2 million acquisition in Cumbria, which is naturally a very large property.
Yeah.
But the prospective purchaser rang us and said, "Are you sure this is mixed use?" And I went, "Well, you're buying 200 acres. It sounds to me like that's a bit big for a garden." But he had to check because his lawyer, his solicitor, wasn't willing to go to the mat and go, "Yes, it's definitely that." And it's one of the differences with us is we are willing to go to the mat and go, "It's definitely that figure. We'll hang our hat on it."
Yeah.
Like you mentioned just there, Simon, sort of, and David referred to us. Education is really key to the way we work and dealing with our clients. And you'd just be amazed at how many people we speak to day in and day out who are, been in the property industry for 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years, hold senior positions at, leading national estate agencies, etc. And we'll tell them how we work, what we do, and what's available. And their comment will be, "I had no idea." So education is really key, and trying to get that message across that you don't have to overpay when you're well within your right not to.
Does that create a bit of a barrier, Ashley, as well, in terms of actually some of these, some of our viewers here today might think, "I just didn't know that," and there's actually that barrier of saying "I didn't know that" is one of the harshest things, because I suppose for what they've got to do, of course, is they've got to be able to communicate to their own clients effectively about why they should be talking to you guys. And if they're outside of that comfort zone, I can imagine that this is where they feel a little bit nervousness. So is that literally just that education piece you talk about there, about you will talk to the agents about how best to introduce yourselves to their own clients? Yeah,
absolutely. And for me, sort of the areas I work in and focus on, that is the kind of the biggest challenge that we see, or certainly one of the biggest challenges. David will go into further detail, but just actually trying to convince someone that this is a legitimate thing. You're well within your right. This is the correct way to do it. Everyone's so used to the traditional way of doing it incorrectly that habits are hard to break, and the initial reaction is quite often, "Oh, that must be a scam. Can't be correct. It must be wrong, etc." But something that really works, and obviously they then have to put their reputation based on what we're telling them, and there's an element of a perceived risk from their point of view. Do I want to, roll this out into my estate agency and tell my clients this if it could come back and bite me? So that education and trying to garner that trust, etc., is really key. And what we often do is, we'll get a single deal over the line, and that can demonstrate and show this is what's achievable. This is what we can do. It works. It's real. And that can help to build trust. But something that really works well for us is just word of mouth. And, we might do a deal or 2 deals or 3 deals, or save a shed load of stamp duty for a certain developer or an estate agency. And more often than not, what we find is, in a few weeks' time, etc., we might get a call from someone saying, "Oh, hi, I heard you helped Dave with this issue. I've got a similar issue. Can you help us," etc. So word of mouth is a really key part of our our marketing and the spreading of what we do. But yeah, absolutely, that initial challenge of trying to convince people that this is a real thing is a significant one.
And I saw some of the testimonials from your own clients that have had it. I mean, I can just imagine how that works in a sense of sat round a dinner table, them saying you've got to talk to these guys. That's what you need to happen on a wider scale, isn't it? Those kind of fireside conversations and chats that just people are able to get that across, is that this isn't something niche or something like that people should be looking at this almost as just as a normal check in the part of the moving process that they're going through.
It should be built into that conveyancing process or that state agency process, and this is, I guess, while we're talking with you guys, it should be part of that process, just as important as finding the correct solicitor or the surveys. The stamp duty is a fundamental element of that, and getting it wrong can be extremely costly. Sorry, David.
No, so I was going to go on to say is that, you know, that there should be no harm in going and looking,
No.
but there is no harm in asking. Fundamentally, is an estate agent's reputation online if he recommends a professional advisor? Well, why would it be different from stamp duty advisors to, say, solicitors or insurance brokers? It's just one of the range of services that needs to be brought to bear as part of the offer acceptance deal cycle.
Yeah.
If this allows agents and their selling clients to improve the price performance and help close a deal, then surely that's a value-added tool. I mean, we've acted more times than I care to remember, but we've had particularly large complex properties referred into us by high-value estate agents who I can't mention, specifically to do the analysis prior to listing the property.
Right.
And one agent rather creatively put guaranteed stamp duty saving on the Rightmove listing.
Right.
Now that property shifted like that.
I can imagine.
And you've, of course, the other thing at the moment is, and we'll talk about the demographic shift, but people are, I'll call it, leaving the cities. And that's been a huge move in the last 12, 18 months, and it looks likely to continue. And again, the further out you go, the more likely it is your property is not going to be 100% residential. There's a value exchange. You know, if you sell your £500,000 or £1 million flat in London and go and buy £1 million in Wisbech or Hunstanton, you're likely to have a very much more substantial property, which is likely to have the annex, the workshops, the whatever. And so you're stepping out of what is arguably a purely residential element into an element where you could be getting the advantage of that lower rate. And that's surely worth knowing about.
Yeah, absolutely is. And I mean, most business experts will tell you really need to understand your cost base before you start coming up with the price of anything, don't they? And so why would you possibly not assess exactly what the true cost of being able to sell something is before you start even looking at where you're going to position it in the marketplace? It doesn't really make that much sense, does it?
No, I mean, we've got one of our we do a lot of work with developers and investors, and one of our larger clients actually had me drive to London the other week to do a site evaluation, so literally to walk the site on what is going to be a permitted development conversion / expansion of a site. I mean, it's a 68 million deal. The cost of getting that wrong is about, in his particular case, about 3.2 million. Now, when you start looking at numbers like that, it's like, ooh. But similarly, the impact, I've always said that the impact of getting good stamp duty advice actually is more relevant in the sub-million category, because that's where people may be impacted by second home surcharge. I've just had to advise a young couple who can't sell their current apartment because of cladding issues. They can't get an EWS1, but they want to move to this new home, so they're going to pay the 3%, and then once they're able to sell it, they'll be able to recover it according to the latest government guidance, but they don't know when that will be, and they're being forced to cash flow that.
It's awful. And can you go back over these claims, or is this something you have to do only at the moment that you're actually transacting?
Oh, ideally you should do it before you transact, but you can go back 12 months and amend your return. In some cases, you can go back 4 years, but there are very, very limited scope for that, and they tend to be the more esoteric. I call them esoteric transactions. But simple claims to relief need to be done within 12 months. So it's always worth, and we do this as a firm, we say to people, send us everything you've done in the last 4 years and we'll just run a ruler over it and see what we can get you back.
Yeah. Okay. So given that, a lot of these areas you've just been talking about, it seems to me that it's fairly staggering. Why has this not become a bit of a media sensation? Why has this not been flagged by the mainstream in terms of looking at this more seriously, where there clearly is a pretty major issue here?
Well, it's rather interesting. I think, I mean, we've had several stories run in various newspapers over the last few years, but like a lot of things, people are kind of used to doing it the wrong way.
Yeah.
And therefore are slightly disbelieving of things. And HMRC spokespeople have not been particularly helpful. Well, clearly turkeys don't vote for Christmas. They're not going to go, yeah, these guys have got a point.
Yeah.
So they've come out with words like, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Well, actually, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably means that your lawyer's screwed up and you've overpaid your stamp duty. Because back when I used to lecture on stamp duty to solicitors at Central Law Training, God bless them, they went out of business at the start of the pandemic. And you used to go into a room, and this is absolutely true. And I once lectured to 70 tax advisors in a room in Birmingham, and I just said, pop quiz, how many reliefs are there for stamp duty? Now, bear in mind, this is tax advisors.
Yeah, they should know.
You know, less than 10, a third of the hands in the room went up. Less than 20, 2/3 in the hands in the room went up. Less than 30, all the hands in the room went up. I went, congratulations, sports fans, it's 49.
That's incredible. First
The
of all,
look of horror on their faces was like, now, if you translate that down to the solicitors, 90% of the room would have their hands up before you got to 10.
Yeah, that's incredible. That strikes me the very definition of a tough crowd, by the way. When you're talking to them, yeah, it is staggering, isn't it? But I suppose that's that's the definition of when these points, why it is becoming mainstream, and indeed why you've been able to recover such a large amount, and but not just that. It sounds to me like really not even scratching the surface of what a major issue this is.
No, and we aren't. And what concerns me, as well as those errors downstream on deals that did happen, is how many deals are being abandoned or not even initiated because of an incorrect perception. I was talking to somebody in mortgage finance last year, and they reckon 1 in 5 deals fall down on affordability because the stamp duty is estimated incorrectly. And of course, that's added into the total cost. That affects the affordability calculation. So yeah, it's a widespread problem. If we could actually get this number right or nearly right from the get-go, I think a lot more deals would happen, and at a lot better prices.
And look, I can't think of any example in the world where transparency doesn't help a situation as well, does it? I mean, that's what we're talking about here, isn't it? Taking away from all the, from looking under in the nooks and crannies of everything, making this as clear as possible as you can, and then people can make their own judgments, and that's got to ease up the marketplace, as it always does whenever you see it in other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. An informed buyer is able to come in and go, well, yeah, I know, plus or minus a couple of percent, what tax I'm going to pay on that property, and I know I can afford that. But if I'm going in and I'm looking at that pile, and a country pile, whatever you want to call it, not pile of bricks, but if you're coming in and saying, oh, that's a nice one, 1.5 million, lovely. Oh, hang on a minute. Ah, right. Okay. I only pay 5% stamp duty on that. Well, that means actually my own internal calculator on affordability means I can probably afford to bid a little bit more.
Yeah.
And in rural property at the moment, it's a highly competitive market for the reasons I've already said, that people are trying to get out of the cities.
And any agent will tell you, if you can push your budget that little bit more, how many other properties it brings into play as well, doesn't it? So
absolutely. Albeit I have to comment, at the time of filming, rural stock is at an all-time low. It's ridiculous.
Yes.
I'm saying that sitting in a rural property, but we've got to move out of this, because there's going to be some building work, and it's 6 months worth, and you don't want to stay here through a winter if no heating, and we cannot find a rural property to rent within 25 miles. Because even the rental stock's been absorbed now.
Absolutely true. So so you spoke about there. So is it fair to ask why solicitors are getting it wrong? I mean, it is simply down to this level of detail, or is it also the fact that they've been so overworked recently as well, haven't they? And most of them would certainly suggest they're not getting a particularly high fee for the work that they do.
I think you've hit all the buttons. Let's start with the sympathy points. Yes, they've been overworked recently, and B, we tend to screw them to the wall when it comes to fees. C, they're not tax experts, and they will say they're not tax experts, but then D, they insist on filling in the return for you, which is kind of like, hold on a minute. And then, as we've identified based on the lecturing experience, probably 40 or 50% of all stamp duty returns are actually filled in by clerical staff, not even qualified lawyers. And again, are they trained? You see, there is a perceptual issue, which is primarily driven from HMRC's calculator, estimator, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So, you go online, you look at a property, you click on the estimate, you think, yeah, stamp duty is not too bad. You appoint a solicitor. The first thing a solicitor has to do is to issue you with an estimated completion statement. And on that has to be the stamp duty. Well, the poor bloke hasn't even opened a file yet, and he's supposed to tell you what the tax is.
Yeah.
So we've now heard that number twice, and then we roll through the deal.
Yeah.
And we get to the final completion statement, and it's got the same number on. So we've heard the thing 3 times. Now, generally, when we hear something 3 times, we tend to believe it. It reinforces that belief in the error or potential error. Whereas if you get in early and go, well, actually, and we've had this as well, where an informed client has come to us, gone, I'm buying this, what's the stamp duty? And you go, that lower figure. And then they toddle along and they get the completion statement from the solicitor and they send it back, D- must try harder. Here's the stamp duty figure. And it's the solicitor who kicks off and goes, no, I can't see why that would be. So, well, have you looked? Yeah. And the solicitor goes, well, of course I haven't looked. So how come you can't see? And you have to get into that kind of, I'll call it debate.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if the client wants the deal to go ahead and the solicitor won't change his ground, he's got 2 real choices. One is change the lawyer, which can be problematic in the midstream. The other one is to say, well, okay, look, I'll pay the higher figure you tell me that you're comfortable with, my money, but you've got to be comfortable. And then the day after we complete, I'll get Cornerstone to reclaim it, and then within 6-8 weeks, I'll have it back.
Yeah. And at this point, can we just talk about how does it work commercially with the clients? What's their what's the payment profile? What are they looking at? Is it straight percentages? Are there initial upfront fees? Just talk us through how that works from Cornerstone's perspective.
Well, the serious answer to that is that we generally, on a pre-completion advisory, will charge £3,000 initial fee, which, by the way, is refundable if the deal falls apart for any reason.
Yeah.
Balance on completion of purchase. If we're doing a refund, you don't pay us until we get the refund.
Yeah, cool.
And no initial fee. And the set scale is 25% of the tax we've saved you or recovered for you.
Yeah.
Generally, when I'm asked that in my usual glib fashion, when people say, how do you charge? I just say, like a raging bull. But it's a value add, and it's a no cost commitment, because if we can't achieve what we say we can achieve, then it costs you nothing.
That's the critical point in all this, isn't it? It's something that they wouldn't have been doing previously, and that makes all the sense there. And I'm guessing there as well, then, David, you've mentioned a few times now that what they're trying to do to probably genuinely help out with that calculator. That replication, though, of the errors in that calculator do cause major issues down the line. If you keep, as you said yourself, if you accept that figure and you've reiterated it 2 or 3 times, if it's based on erroneous data at the beginning, that's not the best position to start in, is it really?
Well, it's the old computer acronym, GIGO, isn't it? Garbage in, garbage out.
Absolutely.
And it is causing problems. It's causing problems for the conveyancing industry or conveyancing profession now, because I'm aware of one law firm that's conducting over 1,000 defences of stamp duty negligence claims against solicitors, mainly in the area of misgranny annexes.
Yeah.
And by the way, just when we talk about annexes, They could be cottages, they could be staff flats, they could be any number of things. They don't have to be just a granny annex.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I mean there's a growth industry in going after the lawyer, which is interesting because we do work both as defending some solicitors, but we've also done work as technical experts, writing technical reports saying why the lawyer got it wrong.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's what we're required to do as professional advisors. If we're instructed, we have to advise.
And they're caught between a rock and a hard place, though, as well, aren't they? To be fair, they're trying to give a bit of advice, and they're trying to, and they're getting caught out if it's not there in a complex area.
No, they are getting caught out. I mean, when I talk to solicitors regularly about this, and I'm saying the best advice to give on stamp duty is to not give any stamp duty advice, and by that I mean don't put any number on there. Yeah. Just mark it. You need to get advice on this, because that way you can't be shot at. I mean, it's the the problem the solicitors have is because they view this as an administrative task. Having done the estimate, they then hand over this draft SDLT return and go, there you go, sign there.
Yeah.
And they think they haven't given tax advice, but they wrote the number on the return.
Yeah.
How can you say literally or either metaphorically your DNA is not on that tax calculation?
Yeah, absolutely right. So look, I appreciate going back to the turkeys voting for Christmas. This is the reverse of that, and you may be slightly influenced towards this answer I'm going to ask you. But I'm guessing most agents should be advising pretty much all of their staff to at least have an initial conversation with you, shouldn't they? Or are there ones that you can just instantly rule out that isn't worth even having the conversation about with yourselves? What I'm trying to say is, how prevalent should be the agents introducing their clients to you?
I genuinely believe anybody who is thinking of making an offer on a property should be introduced to us for at least some outline advice. I mean, there are 5 basic questions, as we call them, and they're very simple. Are you buying this property for your own occupation? Will you have sold your prior main home? Well, that kind of deals with surcharge.
Yeah.
Have you lived in the UK or for more than 183 days?
Yeah.
In the up to the intended date of completion. Very hard to say at point of sale, but let's get a rough answer in. And then the next question we have is actually about the property, and that's not about the prospective buyer. We need a copy of those particulars and any other notes or observations about the site, and then we can give a first, what we call a qualified estimate. Not quite full advice, but we can say, look, it looks like this, but now we need to do a deep dive on it. If that gives the prospective purchaser the confidence to make an acceptable offer, then we're off on the journey.
And those simple 5 questions can essentially save some people tens of thousands of pounds, maybe even more.
Oh yeah, easily. I mean, again, typical £500,000 property that might or may not be liable to the 3% surcharge. There's a £15,000 saving straight away.
Yeah. And if you look, you mentioned there as well, I mean, ultimately you are the ones giving the advice, and that area where, some people might be a bit paranoid about being tainted by, recommendation, but there's never been poor advice, as there, about asking the right questions. So an agent that can portray themselves in that respect, at least having the awareness of knowing that this is a potential issue there, can only step away from the competition, at least in terms of being portrayed as a property expert.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've anybody who says, look, I am looking at a prospective purchaser. Look, I am aware that stamp duty is going to be an issue for you, and let me ask you a few questions. Right, there's somebody you could probably talk to. Would you want to pre-identify inside your stock which properties are likely to be residential, and more importantly, which properties are likely to be not?
Yeah,
that's an interesting thing. What I call a pre-listing audit.
And you can do that, can you, as well? I mean, can you, just on that basis, can you do that as well for the agencies per se?
We can certainly give a quick and dirty outline indication, as they call it. Okay. Which, I mean, again, went back to the one we referred to earlier, that was a specific property where the agent said, it looks to me like, and they sent the client over. We did full advice for the seller.
Yeah.
And then the seller was able to say to his buyer, look, I know this is only going to be the lower 5% rate. And if you go to this firm and pay them for that advice, you will get that detailed advice fully underwritten by their professional indemnity insurance, which is the point is we are, we've got PI cover up to 1.5 million any single claim.
Yeah.
That means, you can practically take that to the bank.
Yeah. Perfect. So how do people get started with you? How do they find out what they should and shouldn't be paying? What's the when somebody's agreed to talk to Cornerstone? What does it look like from that point on?
Are we talking about the agent or about the buyer?
Yeah, sorry, about the buyer.
Well, it's very simple. We get them on the phone and we talk to them. Strangely, talking to people helps to elicit information. And it's not form filling. It's all about having that conversation and teasing out what the buyer is doing, what the buyer wants. As I said, what the buyer wants to use it for. Are they selling? What's going on? Are they connected to the seller? We had one of those, which was weird. Actually worked to the client's advantage. And then really it's about copy of the sale particulars, and then we might even ring the agent and go, hold on a minute, what about that? Yeah. I mean, we had a very, very lovely country property last year or the year before sent in to us, and to give you an example, beautiful 9-bedroom Georgian house, freestanding leisure complex, heated swimming pool. It had all its thing, ticked every boxes. Yeah. Standing in 6.8 acres of deer park, and as soon as I saw the word deer park, ping. Yeah. And then at the end of particulars, substantial outbuildings, and I'm like, I just wonder. So you go online, you go onto Google Earth, and tucked away in one corner of one of the fields of the deer park is this little green building.
Yeah.
So I rang the agent and I said, what's that little green building? He went, oh, that's the abattoir. I said, so you're telling me the current owner farms deer and slaughters them on site? And he went, yeah. I said, why didn't you mention that in the particulars? He said, do you honestly think it would make it more appealing?
Yeah, it's not the first thing you look naturally. You'd be very worried about the sort of person that was demanding that they needed an abattoir.
Slightly. I said, well, you do realise that makes a £400,000 reduction in the stamp duty. Staggering. And at which point he went, I'll put it back in the sale particulars.
That makes all the difference there. So David, essentially what you're essentially a tax Indiana Jones, aren't you? Because as you were going through there, looking at that information, looking for the clues, and then you just, when you find something like that, as you just spoke about, they're literally making the difference hundreds of thousands. It must be a wonderful feeling, to be honest. I can imagine how rewarding your job is.
It's quite a giggle, and I love, look, I love to put a smile on people's faces, and yeah, it's good fun. It doesn't even apply on necessarily the largest properties as well. We had a look at a small one. I say small in terms of value, in Nottingham, and had you read the sale particulars, detached garage.
Yeah.
And luckily, the agent had put on it with inspection pit and internal office. Now, of course, again, alarm bell.
Yeah.
Most domestic garages don't have an inspection pit and they don't have an office. So again, ring, what's going on? Oh, chap used to run a motor repair business out the back of his property, out of this large double. And it was like, well, great. We're straight away. We're not worried about surcharge because it's not wholly residential.
I think it's fascinating. I genuinely think it's really, really interesting. Well, we're going to wind up in a minute, but before we do, I just want to try and summarise if we can do as well. Then, so my takeaways from talking to you guys, listening to what you've spoke about here. Well, SDLT is not a one size fits all. Contrary to popular belief, is it? There are lots of vagaries, and as we spoke about, they are worth investigating. But again, they're worth investigating with experts like your good selves first and foremost. There's a lot of relief, as you've highlighted, when it becomes to SDLT, and again, if the perceived other experts aren't all over this, why would you bother even getting into that murky area? Have a conversation with you guys to find out what's available, and that's the other tick in the box. And again, always have your SDLT verified by an expert. Has got to be the third and most important elements.
I wouldn't disagree with you at all, Simon.
Sure. And you've been really kind, guys, as well. So you mentioned earlier we were talking about obviously how do the agency's own buyers and clients get involved. Agents who want to know a little bit more, what can they do? Just jump on a call with you guys and ask the right questions.
Yep, they can jump on a call. They can go to the website. They can ask us a question. Connect with us over LinkedIn or Facebook. Personally, I would recommend LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And yeah, just feel free to talk to us. If you've got a curiosity, we're always willing to have the conversation.
And just to make the slight little plug there as well, is if you want to go to the Cornerstone Tax landing page on kerfuffle.com as well, you can see further information about these guys. Also, as well, you've been really, really kind to put up an exclusive Kerfuffle deal for our members as well, which I think I'm right in saying is you're able to give 10% of every referral fee for every successful client introduced.
That we are. Absolutely, and happy to do it.
There's a lot of times when I kind of question myself as to why you shouldn't do that, but I'll be honest, I'm stumped as to why no one would, why they wouldn't at least have a conversation with you. It really does. It just feels to me that this has to be an absolutely standard part of the process for people. It's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, we've been advocating this, for the last 5 years and saying, look, this is a value add. The estate agents tend to be what I call vendor focused. They're all about getting the deal for the vendor, but the dynamic of having to have a vendor and I'll call it willing buyer. Yeah. And the number of times I've heard of people saying, oh, they chipped us by 5% because of the stamp duty. And it's like, well, actually, if the stamp duty had been qualified and quantified prior to that negotiation, maybe they wouldn't have chipped you the
no, and that point about so often it is on actually quite small numbers, isn't it? Why deals fall through, and again, then the emotion gets into it. And if you had this in your kit bag, understanding what the true cost was going to be, you might not have even got to that stage in the first place.
Just a point to add there as well is any agents that want to contact us and get in touch and talk about forthcoming completions or how we work together moving forwards. There's always a really good place to start is by having that conversation, saying, right, what have you sold over the last 4 years? Let's have a look at your back catalogue of transactions, because you could be sitting on a tidy little sum of referral fees from us for essentially just sending us your list of transactions. We will go through those, identify where relief may be available, may not be available, and then work together to involve clients and work forwards.
Yeah, we've actually done that for a couple of small law firms as well, where they were quite concerned, and we said, well, can you back audit us? We did, and got several hundreds of thousands of pounds back for quite a number of clients. That was interesting.
Yeah, brilliant, guys. I feel early on a Monday morning, before this actually goes out live, but I feel like I've actually learned something, which is always a great way to start the day. So, gents, Ashley, David, thank you so much for giving us some information. We'll catch up over the coming weeks and months as well to explore this in more detail. But for now, thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome, and thank you for inviting us, Simon.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.